Gilmore Girls A Year in the Life was a fail. Or was it? That's what we're going to be discussing in today's video. Welcome back to the In My 20s Diaries. We are a channel about the intersection between ADHD, Christianity, and singleness. So if you like that kind of content, make sure you give this video a big fat thumbs up and let's get into it. Gilmore Girls A Year in the Life came out roughly 9 to 10 years after the original Gilmore Girls series came out. And when it came out, I think a lot of fans were surprised because they weren't expecting there to be a revival. And what we got from the revival just didn't really add up to all that we followed in Gilmore Girls so far. For me, one of the biggest issues with Gilmore Girls A Year in the Life was timing. Even though 10 years had passed, so many of the characters didn't experience any character growth. So I'm going to go through some of the biggest disappointments in Gilmore Girls A Year in the Life. But first, I want you guys to say hi to my friend today. This is my stuffed animal, and she is going to be the one that is holding the mic that I'm talking into. First things first, let's talk about Rory because sis was struggling. What I don't understand about Rory is that she had everything going for her. She had a mom that loved her so much, a town that basically put her as a baby Jesus, grandparents that went to one of the most prestigious universities in the whole United States, and she got into that university and still she's at 35 years old surfing on the couch and can't find a job. Like, it doesn't really add up. And I think another big thing about Rory is that she didn't learn from her mistakes. Like, we saw her back in the other episodes sleeping with people who had partners already. In fact, one of her and Lorelai's biggest fights was when she was sleeping with a man who already had a girlfriend. And yet we see her in the Year in the Life. She's not married, but she is sleeping with Logan, who, spoiler alert, has a fiance. And so it's a little disappointing to see her character regression over time. And especially since we saw her grow up so much throughout the whole Gilmore Girls series. And it's like at this part, I was like, justice for Rory. We want the sweet high school Rory back. Next, let's talk about Lorelai and Luke. Lorelai and Luke were in a good place at the end of season 7. So why couldn't we have just moved right on to planning into the wedding? Why do we have to take a 10-year break in between all of this? After it took them so long to get together. We see them and they're basically in Stars Hallow still, living in the same house that Lorelai always lived in, and they haven't had the wedding yet. It just makes me wonder, like, what happened? I know that Luke was having his situation with April, which we'll talk about April in a minute, but it really does make you wonder, like, what happened? And I feel like it was a lost opportunity for the Year in the Life because we could have seen all of the growth that Lorelai and Luke went through. We could have seen them married, having to navigate having grown kids since Rory and Jess were both in college. And we also could have seen them with the whole conversation about having babies a lot earlier. Because in A Year in the Life, we see that Lorelai does have to go to a fertility clinic, but I don't know if we really ever got a in-depth explanation of like what happened, besides the fact that Lorelai was in her 40s and she thought that maybe her eggs might be expired, according to Paris. Which brings me to my next one is Paris Gellar. Now, Paris Gellar was my girl, but why did they do her so wrong in The Year in the Life? So Paris is actually divorced at this point, which I think is so sad because her and Doyle had a really healthy and good relationship. They were able to challenge each other and he was the calm to her storm. So it was really nice to see them together. I feel like they were supposed to live happily ever and have kids and grow old together. But instead, we find out that she is divorced to Doyle and that Doyle is a failed screenplay writer. And one of the scenes, I halfway wondered if Rory was going to sleep with Doyle too, because it was giving flirtatious vibes. And I was like, no, Rory, that is Paris's man, not yours. Also, another thing about Paris is that She was a fertility doctor, a CEO, and a lawyer all in 10 years. Now, if you guys know a little bit about the medical field, you know that the process of going from your bachelor's degree to being a registered doctor takes anywhere between 8 to 12 years, especially if you go into your specialties. And Paris Gellar was the type of character that would have done a specialization for her medical school. But instead, we see her as this leader of a fertility clinic, and she had always made fun of the lesser medicines when she was in school. So this didn't really add up. What also didn't add up is that how did Paris Gellar end up being a lawyer and a doctor all in 10 years? Usually when you go to medical school, you are intensely focused on not only medical school, but all of the tests that come along with it. And so I feel like the writers really threw some things in here, and they tried to make her character way too girl bossy. Paris Gellar deserved love just like everybody else, and I feel like they could have done so much better if they just made her a CEO. They didn't have to add all the other titles behind it. The second biggest problem in A Year in the Life was that two of my favorite characters were missing, namely Sookie St. James and Jess. Both of these were really big characters in all of the beginning of Gilmore Girls, and not having them made them feel like something was missing. Sookie really brought the fire and the fun to Stars Hallow, and with her being gone, it really felt like the show was just not the same. The thing is, Sookie actually does come back in the last episode of A Year in the Life to help Lorelai and Luke with their wedding, but I really wish she had been more involved throughout the rest of the episode.
So, I hope you didn't get too far on that cake.
Thankful about it. You caught me in plenty of time.
That craziness for nothing.
Yeah, well, I've been so busy lately, I actually forgot.
And the thing that makes me the most upset is that they almost felt that gap and they filled it with characters that really didn't add to the storyline, like Paul. So if you guys didn't know, Rory did end up dating someone at the beginning of season 7. His name was Paul, and it was a travesty because not only Rory, but everybody in their social circle forgot about Paul.
Hey, that guy's here.
What guy?
Your guy.
Paul.
Paul, yes, Paul.
Paul's not here.
Paul's here.
Who's Paul?
Paul, my boyfriend? Oh, crap. Paul is here.
Why is Paul here?
I invited him for dinner, and I totally forgot.
I've never seen that boy before in my life.
See?
They've been together for months.
I think it's been a year.
He's been to the house.
I know.
He's like a superhero, but his power is that you can't remember him no matter how much time you spend with him.
And so this guy is just following her around and going to dinners, and she's always like, oh my gosh, Paul, I forgot about him. And then when she ends up having her affair with Logan later on, she doesn't break up with Paul. And it takes her all the way until the last episode of A Year in the Life to break up with this dude. And it's like he spent so much time with her being the person that she couldn't even remember. The second person that didn't need to be in The Year in the Life was Naomi Shropshire. I feel like this one was upsetting because the book really could have gone somewhere, but instead we got a whole 2 episodes of The Year in the Life with her waffling back and forth with Naomi, only for them to decide that they didn't want to do the book anymore. And it's just like, if you didn't want to do the book anymore, they could have condensed that whole thing into a little 10-15 minute part of the beginning of A Year in the Life. But instead, we wasted a lot of time getting to know Naomi Shropshire and to get to know all of her weird tendencies and habits for the writing project to get dropped. And I mean, I guess it was good because Rory ended up writing a book afterwards. Sorry, there's a lot of spoilers in this. So if you haven't seen it, go watch it. But if you don't plan on watching it, you can keep watching this. But I was saying that Rory was planning on writing a book anyway, and so maybe this was her push to do it, but it just felt like it was way too much. Speaking of way too much, let's talk about the musical. The musical was way too long. I loved how bizarre it was because it really did give us the backstory on Stars Hallow, but I feel like some of that time could have been used to fill in some of the questions and gaps that we had. Like, what in the heck happened to Lane? And so, I just wish that had been taken out. And then the last character that we didn't need was April. So April had moved away from her dad, And at the beginning of the summer episode, which was my least favorite episode in A Year in the Life, we see her coming back, and she basically has a meltdown because she's lying to her parents and everyone around her about exactly what she's been doing. And that's about the only scene that we get from April in A Year in the Life. And what I don't understand is that we don't get any other clarifying information. So if April wasn't a pot smoking, partying girl, then who was she? And we need more information about where she is now. And also we need to know how her story impacted the overall plot. Like, was she the reason that Lorelai and Luke still haven't gotten married after a decade? Because if so, then she can fight everyone. Also, the last group of people I want to talk about is the 30-something gang. So the 30-something gang was actually the most entertaining part of all of A Year in the Life, besides Emily Gilmore's arc. Yes, Emily, she was so good. But it was a lost opportunity because Rory never ended up doing anything with them. It was like the 30-something gang was Paul, and she spent all of his time like knocking them off. But in reality, she probably could have really benefited from that social group. And I would have loved to see her integrate herself into the group, start to meet the people, and maybe she would have actually ended up with a real job if she had gotten involved in the 30-something gang. And I just don't understand why they added the 30-something gang in there for comedy reasons only. So let's talk about the biggest travesty of all. And I know I talked about the characters earlier, but the number one character who was done so wrong in A Year in the Life was Lane. And the thing about Lane is that I go back and forth on whether or not it was a fail of a character, because in A Year in the Life, she's happy. Her and Zach are married. She has the twin boys and they're growing up in Stars Hallow. But the problem was that that was never the goal for her. Lane grew up having to hide her whole personality, and she worked so hard to get out of that mold that her mom was putting her in. And we saw her in Gilmore Girls with her and her mom having this beautiful relationship at the end, where her mom was actually scheduling tours for Hep Alien, the band that she was in. And so I feel like there was a lot of lost opportunity on Lane's part, because even though she did stay in Stars Hallow, there's this one scene where her and Zach are playing this really soft music. And that was a scene that broke my heart, because I realized that Lane never got to accomplish her dreams. And I feel like even though she wasn't in the band anymore, the producers could have done something else. Like, they could have had her be involved in music by performing around the town at some of the quirky festivals that were had. They could have had her become a tour manager because she really loved music. It was just so many different things that she could have done. But instead, she just ended up being a mother. And being a mother is fine, but that is not the story that Lane would have had. And I feel like also it would have been helpful to have a little bit of a backstory of what changed in Lane. How did she go from being this rebel who loved music and rock and roll to being this person who was content to settle in the future that her mother and everybody else wanted for her? Because that was never the Lane that we knew. And also, I really hate that they made her have twins on her wedding night on her first time. I feel like it was cool that she did have twins and they did end up being her love, but I kind of wish that she would have had just a little bit more time to get her feet settled in the marriage. And it was just a little bit of whiplash for me. But by far, the biggest fail in A Year in the Life was the ending. So they have already came out and said that there is not going to be any more Gilmore Girls episodes. And I actually hope that this is a lie, because I recently saw an ad for a very popular business that had them in it. And so I was kind of hoping that that was an Easter egg for them filming more content. But what I really hated was that they left this on a cliffhanger. And the cliffhanger was something super predictable. Spoiler alert, so if you haven't seen this, go ahead and skip ahead. But in the ending scene, we see Rory telling her mother that she's pregnant. Understandably so, we know that the father of the baby is Logan. And I hate this because, number one, it makes her be in the same exact position that her mother was in, where she has to be single. And number two, it was one of the least interesting endings that we could have left off on. We needed to know more about all of the people in the town. I feel like we barely scraped the surface with how each of the characters got to where they were. And it would have been so much better if we had ended off on a note of like mystery and air. But for them to just shut the show down like that and say, oh, we don't need any more Gilmore Girls, it was really unsatisfying and underwhelming. So those were all the reasons why Gilmore Girls A Year in the Life were a fail. But now let's talk about the other side of the coin and see if maybe Gilmore Girls A Year in the Life was a success. But if you made it to this point in the video, please make sure you stop and give this video a big thumbs up. The like tells the algorithm that you like this type of content so it can recommend it to more people and so that we can keep spreading the word about good shows and about so the number one reason why Gilmore Girls A Year in the Life was a success was because it accomplished the goal that the writers were going for, which was showing the long-term result of generational trauma. So I did a video recently talking about what Gilmore Girls did right, and one of the things I talked about was how they really took generational trauma and they made it into the covert thing that it is, which is a very realistic thing because most of the time you don't even realize that you are carrying on generational trauma until it's too late. And the thing is, we see how each of the girls ended up following the life paths of their mothers. Rory ended up like Lorelai, pregnant at, not at 16 though, but pregnant and not having the father in the child's life. And then we saw the same thing with Lane. Lane stayed in Stars Hallow and she chose being a mother over her career, and etc, etc, etc. And there's nothing wrong with this, but it's a little bit unsatisfying because I think in our heads we were rooting for a lot more character growth and development. But instead what we got was a realistic view of what happens when you let wealth and money and status lead your life. And so that's the number one reason why I'm hoping that they do make more Gilmore Girls episodes, because I would love to see a redemption arc for Rory and to see her kind of like move forward past this failed area of her life. And I feel the same way with Lane as well. Like I would love to see her discover her love for playing rock music again and maybe even apologize for how she put it to the sideline for all these years. Another reason why Gilmore Girls A Year in the Life was a success was because they brought back the fall and winter vibes. As you guys know, like I said in the video last week, fall and winter vibes is the reason that people keep coming back to Gilmore Girls year after year. And they were definitely present in these episodes. Also present was all of the characters that we know and loved, except for Suki and Jess and then Suki's husband. But it was really nice to revisit all the characters and see where they were in their lives. So overall, was A Year in the Life a fail? Yes, A Year in the Life was a fail in the execution. They strayed way too far from some of the storylines that people knew and loved best, and they changed some of the characters to where there was no character growth. And so if you were coming to A Year in the Life to see dynamic characters, you probably would have gotten bored and not watched it. Overall, I give A Year in the Life a 3 out of 5 because they did some characters really, really wrong. But I will say that if you are looking at it from the perspective of the portrayals of generational trauma, then Gilmore Girls A Year in the Life was successful in that aspect. But I still don't believe that this fact can patch up all of the character inconsistencies that we saw in these 4 seasons of A Year in the Life. And also, I really hate that A Year in the Life was only 4 seasons because it doesn't stick to the original thing that Gilmore Girls was. Gilmore Girls was 7 seasons long with 22 episodes per season. I'm not saying that A Year in the Life had to be that long, but I watched all of The Year in the Life in one day. And so I have a lot less of a motivation to come back and rewatch it again and again. And so I really wish that they had stretched it out a little bit more. And I feel like if they had stretched it out a little bit more, then maybe we would have got some of the answers that we were looking for. It just felt really rushed overall. Now let's get on to today's moment of inspiration. I am super excited about the moment of inspiration today because it is a testament of the growth and development that I've went over throughout the past year. As you guys know, this is the time where everybody is preparing for the next year, and you guys are probably looking at your goals and habits and trying to figure out how to make them into a much better thing so that you get things done and become more productive. So today's moment of inspiration book is Atomic Habits by James Clear. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this book before, but I really want to talk about the power of environment. So one of the reasons I believe in Gilmore Girls, why Rory and Lane and her mother all turned out the way that they did, is because of the environment that they were in. And so I'm on page 82, which says, environment is the invisible hand that shapes human behavior. Despite our unique personalities, certain behaviors tend to arise again and again under certain environmental conditions. In church, people tend to talk in whispers. On a dark street, people act wary or unguarded. In this way, the most common form of change is not internal but external. We are changed by the world around us. Every habit is context dependent. But I wanted to talk about this because I recently have gotten really into YouTube. And in years prior, I felt like I could never stick to it. And do you want to know what changed? I changed my environment. In a moment, I'm going to turn my camera around so you guys can see my film setup. So here's my filming setup. As you guys can see, I have one softbox light here, another softbox light here, and then I have my bookshelf here. So that bookshelf over there contains all of my filming journals and things that I need. So when I go to film, I always know that I have this space. And finally, I have my calendar here, which shows me all of the dates and things that I need to do. There used to be a desk in my corner over there, and it made it really difficult for me to film. So now I moved that desk out the way, I feel a lot better with filming. So as we go into 2025, keep this one thing in mind. Change your environment, change your life. I believe in you. So I'm so excited that you guys decided to listen to this video, and I'm gonna finish this out in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for waking us up this morning and starting us on our way. And I thank you, Lord, for TV shows that give us comfort during hard times. And I pray, Lord, for the person that watched this video, that they would get something from it. And I pray also that you would speak to them about any action steps that they may need to go into a new year with a new mindset. And I just thank you, Lord, for the fact that this person just stopped by today. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So that was my view on whether a year in the life was a success or a fail. Comment down below, did you enjoy a year in the life, and do you actually think it was successful? Let's start a really good comment thread down below. Anyway, if you like this video, please make sure you watch this video or this video here in the card, and make sure you share the love of Jesus with one person this week. Okay, bye.